Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Transitioning to the New Heavy Vehicle Service and Maintenance Technician Apprenticeship Standard. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to explain a few things about our webinar platform to allow you to get the most out of the experience. All viewers are in listen-only mode. To engage with the webinar, please use the on-screen panel. You can use the tabs on the panel to adjust your audio settings. You can also use the question and chat tabs to engage with us. We expect that our webinar will be popular, but our team will do their best to answer any of your questions and queries you may have. After the webinar, we will be providing a recording, a copy of the slides, and a fact sheet to address any unanswered question. Now I'd like to hand over to our presenters, Pat Santos and Paul Tunnicliffe.
Hello, this is Patricia Santos, Industry Manager for City and Guilds. The agenda for today, for the webinar, first, we're going to go through an overview of the apprenticeship reforms. Then we will go into detail on the standard and the assessment plan for the heavy vehicle service and maintenance technician. After that, we will explain how we can support you to prepare with the delivery of training and for the endpoint assessment. We will summarize all of this by explaining step by step how all this works, how you will work with us. And after additional information, there will be a Q&A session. So first of all, as you may know, at the moment, the apprenticeship reforms are at full swing. I mean, we provide you with a 25-minute recorded session in which you can listen in detail on the apprenticeship reforms. But today, I just wanted to highlight the main differences between the SASE frameworks and the apprenticeship standards. So the SASE frameworks, they were designed by sector skills councils. At the moment, with the apprenticeship standards, these have to be developed by employers. They are led by employers. So at least 10 employers, they have to get together, and there should be at least 2 SMEs to be able to work in the development of an apprenticeship standard. The SASE frameworks used to be based on multi-occupational or subject areas. For example, vehicle, maintenance and repair, pathways for light vehicle, heavy vehicle, motorcycle, etc. But the apprenticeship standards, they are based on the specific occupations, like in this case, heavy vehicle service and maintenance technician occupation. The key components of the SASE frameworks, they were based on qualifications, on outputs. So there was a mix of on-the-job and off-the-job training. The apprentices, they had to take mandatory qualifications. In the case of automotive, VCQs or competence-based qualifications and VRQs or knowledge-based qualifications. There was a requirement for maths and English. Also was a requirement to demonstrate personal learning and thinking skills. And the apprentices, they had to fill in an employment rights and responsibilities workbook. Once they had achieved all these components, that's when they were certificated and they were deemed occupational competence. However, although SASE frameworks are based on outputs and qualifications, apprenticeship standards are focused on developing people. The 3 main components of the standards are a non-program phase, during which the apprentices, they learn the skills, knowledge, and behaviors they need to become a competent technician. There is a gateway in which the employer and the provider, they have to agree that actually the apprentice is ready for the endpoint assessment and they've achieved the minimum maths and English requirements. And the most important component of the apprenticeship standards is the endpoint assessment. During the endpoint assessment, apprentices are holistically assessed on all the training they've gone through during their program. And they are assessed by assessment organizations approved by the Institute for Apprenticeships, and they are assessed by independent assessors. Once the apprentice has passed the endpoint assessment, assessment organizations, they need to submit the information to the ESFA, and the Institute for Apprenticeship will deliver the apprenticeship certificate to the employer, and that's when the apprentice will be deemed occupational competence. For this reason, the government, the Department of Education, is very keen on the endpoint assessment and how to ensure consistency across the country. The OWN program is more flexible to enable you to carry out efficiencies in terms of training. So qualifications are not mandatory. There isn't a mandatory requirement to have qualifications, and there isn't also a requirement to have employment rights and responsibility. However, the apprentice will have to develop the behaviors expected for an occupational competent technician.
Hello, Paul Tunnicliffe, Technical Advisor for Automotive. I'm just going to take you through some of the way that this apprenticeship standard has been developed, and also talk a little bit about off-the-job training and how we can support you. So this slide here is just going through some of the off-the-job training exercises that can be done during the apprenticeship. So you may be aware that 20% of an apprenticeship standard has to be what we call off-the-job training. For automotive, for light and heavy vehicle, this fits quite well in what we do, because if you look at this list, most of this is carried out within the training period. So things like manufacturer training could be, apprentices could go away into manufacturer training. There could be things like obviously attending college, doing lectures, and things like time spent doing assignments or looking at e-learning during the working day also counts. So that's just a slide to give you some guidance, but we'll come back on to 20% a bit later on. So what I'm going to do now is just talk a bit about this particular standard. So as you may be aware, these standards are developed by employer groups. So there's the employer group that came together for the heavy vehicle service and maintenance technician. So what they were involved with was some of these key documents. So obviously developing the apprenticeship standard, which is the 2-page brief of what the job role is for a heavy vehicle technician. Also, they were involved in the assessment plan, so developing in detail what the journey will look like for that student on program and then for endpoint assessment. There's actually an employer brief available, which we're going to give you the link for, an occupational brief, which you can look at, which might be interesting. And then we've got the endpoint assessment pack, which City and Guilds are developing to help centres really drill down to the detail for endpoint assessment. So you may, if you've been to any of my networks before, or if you've looked at some of our webinars, you may have seen a similar graph for the light vehicle. The difference with the heavy vehicle is we've got end-of-year reviews, which are very important. So you could still call it a gateway, but basically at the end of each year there needs to be quite a detailed review carried out with the learner, with the apprentice, because those reviews will be looked at by the independent endpoint assessor at the end of the, as part of the professional discussion. So you can see there, nothing that we're not used to. Year 1 doing foundation skills, induction skills, moving to year 2 where it's remove, refit, intermediate diagnostics, and then moving to complex diagnostics in the final year. In the final year, before endpoint assessment, there would need to be a final review carried out, and then the apprentice could be put forward for endpoint assessment. There's some other details on the bottom there where it talks about the off-the-job training again that needs to be documented, and we have some tools that you may be interested in to do that. We've actually got a tracker in our e-portfolio, our learning assistant, which we'll talk about a bit later on. Just to point out, before the apprentice goes through for endpoint assessment, they need to have achieved the Maths and English at level 2 or GCSE grades, which are the equivalent to that. And then finally, for this slide, there was a little mention there about the endpoint assessment, but I'm going to go into more detail on the tasks involved shortly. So, like I said, before going through to endpoint assessment, the apprentice must achieve level 2 English and Maths. That's similar to the light vehicle. Although on light vehicle they also have to do the FCAS. There's no mention of doing an FCAS qualification for the heavy vehicle. It mentions there that there is a minimum 12-month duration for this apprenticeship, so it would be possible for students with prior knowledge to enter the qualification at a later stage, but there is a minimum of 12 months. Towards the end of the training journey, and when the apprentice is ready to go through to endpoint assessment, we're going to provide a gateway declaration form, which would be documented so that we know where the apprentice is at and that the apprentice is ready. And then we require a 90-day booking window for endpoint assessment. So what's going to happen then for endpoint assessment for the heavy vehicle? Okay, so the employee group have come together and decided that for the practical side, they're wanting 5 observed tasks. The first one is a 30-minute walk and talk around the vehicle, including general safety. So the apprentice will basically be making a recommendation if the vehicle is safe, and pointing out any faults. There doesn't have to be any faults added to the vehicle for this particular task, but if they do spot something that's borderline, it would need to be documented. And then another 4 tasks, one from chassis, driveline, engine and electrical. Again, we've got some guidance from the EPA document. 3 of those tasks must be 20 to 30 minutes in duration. And a 4th task must be 60 minutes and include multi-stage diagnostics. They're also looking for job cards to be written after each observation, and those job cards will be referenced again by the independent endpoint assessor, and they'll be graded. So we're expecting that the whole event will take place over 1 day. So we're looking at 4 hours of practical, an hour for the professional discussion, and then which will give time to review the logbook. There is some guidance on resits as well. Resits will be allowed after a period of training, but before 6 months, or the whole endpoint assessment will need to be reset. This information here has come straight from the endpoint assessment document that's available on the government website. So this is some information here about the theory exams. So there's 2 theory exams that are required. We have the engineering requirements. It's a multiple choice exam, and as you can see there, list on the right, this is actually the main exam where we're actually drilling down into all the different categories of the vehicle: suspension, steering, brakes, electrics, and so on. And then there's a wider requirements exam, which is, again, it's multiple choice, and this one is going to look at things like health and safety, COSH, legal requirements, and then getting into customer service and things like safe lifting, etc. So what this next batch of slides just show you again is just gives you a bit more information of those practical tasks. So there's some information there about the walk and talk. We've got some chassis task examples. Again, the employee group have come up with these tasks. driveline and suspension, electrical tasks, and we've got some engine tasks, and you can see here that on some of them, which have got a hash next to them, what we're saying, what the employee group is saying is these could be put or set up on the rig to save time. So the actual endpoint assessment then, when it comes to the professional discussion, so the log of progression, so the logbook or the apprenticeship training manual, whether that's an e-portfolio or a paper document, will be looked at, and there'll be basically discussions about the journey that the apprentice has made over the training period, looking at how they progressed against the annual reviews and the targets. The training provider may participate in this discussion, looking at 1 hour duration, so 10 minutes focusing on behaviours, and then 50 minutes on a range of topics, which you can see if you want to look at the endpoint assessment document on the government website. There is a grading chart that the employee group have come up with, and you can see there job card write-ups are going to be graded pass, merit or distinction, so more points can be scored towards the write-ups, which will then differentiate between the learners achieving a higher grade at the end.
Thank you, Paul. So all the information we've gone through in regards to the content of the standard and the assessment plan has been developed by the employer group and is available in the government website. We will send you the links. But how are we going to help you to be able to deliver this apprenticeship standard and to make your apprentices successful for the endpoint assessment? The first thing we've done is that we've taken all these documents produced by the employer group and we've broken them down in over 50 tasks across the 3 years of the apprenticeships. And what we try to do with that is to support your delivery and the apprentices' progressions during their own program. So this training manual is available for all the apprentices via the Work Garden by the end of this month. And the content of the training manual is over 50 tasks to cover their own program. There is a list of the tools and equipments you need to be able to deliver it. In addition, there is a glossary and a list of key terms and definitions with visuals for those learners who, like myself, English is not the first language. In addition, there are also sections in which the apprentice is encouraged to reflect on their own training, on their own progress. And the idea is also to try to stretch them, to try to use and improve their literacy skills. This training program is available in our Work Garden, as I mentioned before, and you can access it to the Work Garden for £30. But in addition, what we've done is that we've developed an e-portfolio, an e-learning assistant, to cover the 3 years of this apprenticeship standard. So the over 50 tasks we've developed for your training manual, they are also available in our e-portfolio and can be accessed 24/7 by the employer, the apprentice, the training provider, or the college. For each one of the tasks, you are able to upload any type of evidence. So for each task, you could upload videos of up to 45 minutes or audios of more than 60 minutes. But the main beauty of our learning assistant is that it has tracking capabilities to be able to track the on-the-job and off-the-job training. So basically, in Learning Assistant, you are able to enter what has been delivered within on-the-job and off-the-job training and calculate a summary time that then you can use for evidence for offset inspections or ESFA inspections. So the price of the Learning Assistant, it depends on the number of learners. It is both per new enrollments. What I'm trying to say is that, for example, if you have 25 learners enrolled this year, and it's going to take them 3 years to complete the program, you would only pay a registration fee at the beginning where they are enrolled. You don't have to pay every year. To give you an idea, the average price, because it depends on the number of learners, but the average price paid by centers is around £25 per learner. But as I said, is per new enrollments per year. In addition, a learning assistant can also include other programs. So for the same price, not only you have your heavy vehicle technician e-portfolio, for the same price you also can include oral maths and English qualifications, whether it is the full suite of functional skills qualifications or whether you want to use our bite-sized maths and English qualifications, which can enable learners to progress towards functional skills or GCSEs. So just to sum up, learning assistant, the licenses are per learner, they are per new enrollment, and you can get more than one package within that price. So for an average of 25 quid, you would have access to the heavy vehicle, for example, and the maths and English, or the light vehicle, etc. In this list, in this slide, you can see a list of other resources that you may find useful to use for your maths and English. So how is it going to work? Okay, what I'm going to do now is to go through the endpoint assessment process on how, practically, how the logistics of the endpoint assessment is going to be for heavy vehicle service and maintenance technician. So as we mentioned before, every apprenticeship has an on-program section, a gateway when the employer and the provider, they signed up the apprentice as ready for the endpoint assessment and the endpoint assessment. In the case of on-program, if you want a training manual or learning assistant, you just speak to your business manager or go to a wall garden and buy them separately. You don't need to register for a product. In terms of the endpoint assessment, you have two options. The endpoint assessment number is 9302, and you have the option of the endpoint assessment taking place at your venue. So we will check that your venue is fit for purpose for the endpoint assessment, and will send independent assessors. Or you may ask for endpoint assessment to take place on another venue offered by us, by City and Guilds. So in that case, we'll provide you with the venue and the independent assessor. In either case, you will have to pay a registration fee, a fee for the assessment, and a retake. Let's go with an example on how the heavy vehicle is going to work in terms of how the payment structure takes place. There are only two charging points. So at the beginning, as you can see in the graph in the website, there's a reservation fee of £25 that you will have to pay at the very beginning for each one of the learners. Then you will decide with an endpoint assessment team when you want the endpoint assessment to take place. So that's the EPA reservation request. The endpoint assessment will take place, the endpoint assessment event, and then where it says balance, that is when you are going to pay for the endpoint assessment. So as you know, when you book for the endpoint assessment, you get 20% of the funding band from the ESFA to be used for the endpoint assessment when it is booked. With this simple structure, what we are doing is that before the endpoint assessment takes place, you will only have to pay the registration fee, £25, but the rest of the balance, let's say that the endpoint assessment is £1,000, £25 would be at the reservation fee, and the remainder, £975, you won't have to pay until the endpoint assessment has taken place and the assessor has submitted the results. So basically, you will have the ESFA funding with you, and you will then pay us the endpoint assessment. There are no other hidden charges. Obviously, if you need to retake again any of the assessments, you will go again into the EPA reservation request. You don't have to pay the £25 again. And after the retake event takes place, that's when you will pay the balance of the endpoint assessment. Why are we doing this? Because what we are trying to do is to align our invoicing system to your cash flows. So whenever we are charging you for the endpoint assessment, we want to make sure you already got the funding from the ESFA. So basically to make it as less inconvenient as possible. Again, how do you get approved? And you don't need to get approved for the program. You just can buy the materials via our wall garden or speak to your business manager, or if you want a demo or learning assistant, you can go into that email address, directsales@cityandguilds.com. If you want to get approved for the endpoint assessment, in our website we have an approval form available, an application form available that you need to use to become approved for the endpoint assessment, whether you are a City and Guilds Centre or not.
And just some information about quality assurance. What we're recommending is that you do maintain an IQA process so that you can maintain standards with your assessors that are teaching the on-programme. But because there's no qualifications attached to these standards, you won't have EQA visits involved in this process, because obviously you'll see our independent endpoint assessor at EPA time. But remember, obviously, that the funding is coming from Ofsted, so if we are recommending that you maintain a quality process so that you can evidence standards within your centre. Also, it does mention the 20% again there, the 20% off the job, and like Patricia said, we do have a great tracking facility for that within the e-portfolio, which is really handy.
So just to summarize, let's go step by step, just to sum up the presentation. Let's go step by step throughout the whole process for the endpoint assessment. So first of all, the apprentice is recruited and goes through induction. The provider, and in some cases the employers, they register the apprentice on the ILR. Obviously, if you are a provider, you will need to agree your training program, your training price proposal with your employer. After that, if you want to use any of our materials, which it is not mandatory, because as I said, the ON program allows as much flexibility as you want in terms of delivery of training. If you want to access our learning materials, you use the wall garden. After that is when the ON program takes place. Remember that to be an apprenticeship, at least there should be 12 months of training and 20% of the job, as Paul has mentioned before. It is also important that by the gateway, the apprentice has achieved the maths and English at level 2 GCSEs A to C. In box number 5, you make the reservation, or the employer, to City and Guilds at least 90 days before the endpoint assessment is required. At this point, that's when the registration fee of £20 will apply. In number 6, our endpoint assessment team is going to contact you, because obviously they will need to arrange with you when is the best date and time to carry out the endpoint assessment and whether you need a venue or not. On number 7, what happens is that you will need to give us a declaration form confirming that the apprentice has achieved the maths and English by the gateway, and that yourself and the employer are happy for the apprentice to take the endpoint assessment. Number 8, the endpoint assessment takes place. Then what we do is that we process the results and we confirm the grades. Obviously, we need to standardize these results across the country. So it's not. It will take a few days, up to 4 weeks, depending on the type of apprenticeship standard. Number 10, and this is an interesting one. This is when we send a certificate of achievement, a City and Guild certificate of achievement. So you have for your records. And also here is when we will charge you the balance of the endpoint assessment. And remember, we will charge you for the endpoint assessment after the endpoint assessment has taken place and the results have been processed. After this, we will need to speak to liaise with the ESFA. So the apprenticeship certificate, which is the one which deems the competence of the technician, will be sent to the employer by the Institute for Apprenticeship. We've put a few links here. I mean, if you want to keep on top of any updates, if you don't receive our newsletters or our email alerts, please use the first link to register. If you want to be involved in the development of the new apprenticeships, you can use either of those email addresses. And in the third bullet point, we've included with the slides a demo on how a learning assistant works. In addition, if you need more information about endpoint assessment, please email endpointassessment@epa@cityandguilds.com. In addition, just to let you know that we are recruiting independent assessors across all apprenticeship standards. We are a registered assessment organization for. So if you would like to become an independent endpoint assessor for this occupation or any other occupations, please go to our website where the application forms and role profiles are available. And I'll hand over to Drew for questions.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we've now got time for a quick Q&A. On the tab, you should see a questions panel. If you'd like to type your questions in there, we've got a few minutes to go through and answer any queries you may have. Okay, so just a reminder to send through any questions you may have on the tab, and we'll answer them as we go through. Can you read that first question there?
What is the cost of the learning materials via walled garden per learner?
Okay, in terms of the training manual, that's a printed copy, a hard copy. That's £30 per learner, per manual. In terms of the e-portfolio, the learning assistant, it is based on number of learners. The average, more or less, is 25% per learner. As I said before, please note that
25 to £35 per learner.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it is in the case of learning assistant, the e-portfolio, it is per new enrollments. So, for example, if you register for learning assistant, one apprentice, and it's gonna need 3 years to complete the apprenticeship, you only pay once for learning assistant when the learner is registered. In addition, as I mentioned before, you can add more programs for the same price, up to 4 or 5 more programs. So let's say that in your center you deliver a heavy vehicle and maths and English and light vehicle. This is an example, and hairdressing. So in that case, the £25–30 per learner would include all those products with just one fee. And remember that you also contains the functionality for the 20% of the job.
Okay, we've got another question about exam resits. The guidance from the employer group in the document is that resits for the multiple choice exams can take place after a period of learning. of up to 1 month, but there's a maximum of 3 resits, and those resits will only be maximum mark of a pass.
In terms of the practical, let's say that you need a retake for the practical assessments. The employer group have decided that, again, as with the multiple choice, you cannot have more than 3 retakes per assessment, for each assessment. And in the case of the practical one, or the professional discussion, it cannot take longer. You need to take the further training and the reset within the next 6 months.
Yeah.
If it takes you longer than 6 months to prepare the apprentice to retake the practical one, in that case, you have to take the whole endpoint assessment again. So just to recap, all the assessments can be retaken individually, all of them, up to 3 retakes, so 4 takes on total. So if it's multiple choice, you have 1 month. You have to wait at least for 1 month to allow the apprentice to be ready. You cannot take it before that month. If it's one of the multiple choice exams, there are 2. If it's the practical observations where you need to retake, again, you will have to provide the additional training and retake the practical tasks within 6 months. If it takes longer, the apprentice will have to retake the whole endpoint assessment. And this has been decided by the employer group.
Okay, we've got one more question.
We've got a, sorry,
No worries.
we've got a question there. Can you adapt the logbook training manual to suit your workplace? I would say the answer to that is yes, especially if you're using the logbook through Learning Assistant, because you can actually, there's lots of room in there for you to upload training tasks towards the assessments, so you can adapt it to what's happening in the workplace. If it's the training manual, I mean, if it's the hard copy, I mean, that's something that we will need to look into it, to be honest. I mean, if you would like it to have like in a PDF, etc., let us know. I think we are planning to release those in electronic.
Yeah, we may make them available in the smart screen also, in case you want to adapt them to your own, for example, Moodle.
I mean, there's no problem with adding extra tasks. Those tasks that are being designed into that logbook, they're not mandatory. They're just examples of what might be good for the apprentice to work towards.
Yeah, another question is, can you make up your own training manual? Yes, as I mentioned before, how you train your apprentices all the way up till the gateway is entirely up to you. Like, there are no mandatory qualifications or mandatory support materials. That's why the new apprenticeship standards are more flexible than the current frameworks. All the resources we've gone through today for the program is to try to make your life easier, or in the case that you want to have your own materials off the shelf, let's say. But if for any reason you already have your own training materials or formative assessment materials, yes, you are able to use your own materials. The materials are mandatory.
Brilliant. If you have any more questions, it's the final call, so please put in the question tab. We'll give you a few more seconds. And we've got nothing extra come through.
There's one more that has just come up. It's about if we have any examples on how to, or any suggestions on how to standardize the delivery of a program. As Paul mentioned before, we won't have EQAs going to centers. However, we are arranging network events in which you will be able to share best practice of internal standardization with other customers. So please sign up for our email alerts so you are aware of these network events taking place and you could join us. So there is a question about whether these changes are applicable to Northern Ireland. The apprenticeship standards, the new apprenticeship reforms, apply only to England. So these changes do not apply to Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the apprenticeship frameworks at the moment remain as they are, with the qualifications as mandatory. However, I mean, although the training manual has been developed to support this apprenticeship standard, it is a really good training manual, so I would recommend you to have a look or contact Paul or attend one of the events, because you may find it useful for the delivery of the training of your apprenticeship frameworks in Northern Ireland.
Did we get the last question there from Stephen?
Yeah, there is a question, are all the materials for the apprentice journey now available? They should be by the end of the month.
Thank you.
Okay. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much to our presenters, Pat Santos and Paul Timothy. And thank you very much for following us wherever you are. And we hope to see you on the next one soon.